The bouquet slipped from Felix's trembling hands the moment the doctor whispered, "If you truly care about him, don't let him know you're here." The flowers scattered across the polished hospital floor, white lilies rolling toward the silent hallway where every heartbeat seemed louder than the last. Felix stood frozen, unable to breathe. The scent of antiseptic mixed with the sweet fragrance of the crushed petals, creating a memory he knew would never leave him. His fingers curled into shaking fists. "What do you mean? I can't see him." The doctor lowered his eyes as if searching for words gentle enough to soften a truth that refused to become gentle. "Asked for this." 4 words struck harder than any scream. Felix blinked once, then twice. No, Hyun would never say that, not after everything they had survived together. Not after every promise they had made beneath late-night city lights, when exhaustion and laughter blended into memories only they understood. "You're mistaken," Felix whispered. The doctor remained silent. Silence became the answer Felix feared most. Outside the intensive care unit, the hallway was unusually quiet. Nurses moved carefully, avoiding eye contact. Every passing footstep echoed against the cold walls, while the fluorescent lights cast pale reflections over the marble floor. Felix looked toward the closed hospital door. Just beyond it, Hyun was there, so close, yet impossibly far away. His heartbeat pounded against his ribs as memories flooded back. Only 3 days earlier, Hyun had laughed while teasing Felix for always bringing flowers instead of snacks. "If I'm ever in the hospital," he had joked, "bring me fried chicken instead." Felix had laughed until tears formed in his eyes now. He stood outside that very hospital room carrying flowers, and Hyun had refused to see him. Nothing made sense. A familiar voice interrupted the suffocating silence. "You should leave." Turned. Chan stood several steps away, exhaustion painted across his face. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes, evidence that sleep had become a forgotten luxury. "You knew?" Felix asked quietly. Chan hesitated. "Yes." "You didn't tell me?" "I couldn't." Answer only deepened the wound. Felix searched Chan's expression, hoping to find anger, misunderstanding, anything except guilt. Instead, he found sorrow, real sorrow, the kind that couldn't be faked. Felix's breathing became uneven. "What happened?" Chan looked toward the hospital room before speaking. "Hyun believes you're carrying a burden that's already too heavy." Frowned. "What burden?" Chan closed his eyes. "He thinks if you see him like this, you'll never forgive yourself." The sentence lingered between them. Felix shook his head repeatedly. "That doesn't explain anything." "No," Chan admitted softly. "It doesn't." Rain began tapping against the hospital windows. Tiny droplets crawled down the glass like silent tears, blurring the city lights outside into shimmering streaks of silver and blue. Felix walked toward the window, pressing one hand against the cold surface. His reflection stared back, pale, broken, confused. Somewhere behind that door, someone precious was fighting a battle he wasn't allowed to witness. For the first time in years, Felix felt completely helpless. A nurse approached carefully. "Excuse me." Turned immediately. "There was something left for you." She handed him a small brown envelope with his name written across the front in familiar handwriting. His hands trembled before he even opened it. Inside rested a folded letter, nothing else. No explanation, no photographs, no hospital report, just one letter. Felix unfolded the paper slowly. The first line stole every ounce of strength from his body. "If you're reading this, it means they kept their promise. And you still came anyway." His vision blurred instantly. A single tear landed on the page before he could stop it, then another, and another. The hospital corridor disappeared behind a veil of tears as Felix realized that whatever truth waited inside the rest of the letter would change everything he believed about the person waiting beyond that closed door. The paper trembled between Felix's fingers as another tear fell onto the ink, leaving a faint stain that blurred the first sentence. He wiped his eyes quickly, afraid that if he hesitated any longer, he would lose the courage to keep reading. "You must be angry right now." A bittersweet smile flickered across his face. "Wrong," he whispered to the empty hallway. "I'm terrified." Sounds of hospital monitors drifted faintly through the walls. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed before being gently hushed by a nurse. Life continued as if nothing extraordinary had happened, yet for Felix, time had stopped the moment he learned he wasn't allowed to see Hyun. He looked down at the letter again. "Don't blame the others. They didn't choose this." I asked every one of them to keep you away from me, no matter how much it hurt. Felix swallowed hard. Images flashed through his mind. Chan avoiding his calls, Minyu giving short answers, Changbin pretending to be busy, Han looking away whenever Felix mentioned visiting the hospital. He had thought they were hiding something out of anger. Now he realized they had been protecting a promise. His chest tightened. The paper rustled softly as he continued. You always smile first, even when you're hurting. That's why I couldn't let you see me like this. Felix closed his eyes. He remembered countless moments when Hyun had noticed things no one else did. Even during exhausting schedules, Hyun would quietly leave a bottle of water beside him or remind him to eat before anyone else noticed he had skipped a meal. Hyun had always seen through him. Even now, a quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. Chan approached again, holding 2 cups of warm coffee. I figured you hadn't eaten, he said gently. Felix accepted one without speaking. The warmth seeped into his cold hands, but it did little to calm the storm inside him. Long has he been here? Felix finally asked. 5 days. Felix stared at him. 5, Chan nodded. You only found out today because that's what Hyun wanted. Felix looked down at the untouched coffee. 5 days, 5 mornings, 5 nights, 5 days of wondering why his messages had gone unanswered. 5 days believing Hyun simply needed space. The realization struck like a wave, leaving him breathless. I should have known, he murmured. No, Chan replied immediately. There was no way you could have. Felix wasn't convinced. Guilt settled heavily on his shoulders. If he had called more often, if he had ignored the excuses, if he had come sooner, would anything have changed? The questions circled endlessly, each one sharper than the last. The letter remained unfinished in his hands. Taking a slow breath, he forced himself to continue reading. There is something I've hidden from you for a long time, not because I didn't trust you, but because I was afraid of what it would do to your heart. Felix's pulse quickened. Every word seemed heavier than the one before it. Once told me that true friendship means sharing pain. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But some pain grows so quietly that by the time you notice it, it already belongs to you alone. A tear escaped despite his efforts to hold it back. He remembered that conversation. It had happened on a rooftop after a long rehearsal. They had watched the sunrise together, laughing over instant noodles while promising never to carry burdens alone. Hyun had remembered every word, yet somehow he had carried this burden in silence. Felix folded the letter against his chest and looked toward the hospital room once more. The door remained closed. The hallway remained silent. But inside his heart, something had changed. He no longer wanted answers simply to ease his own fear. He wanted Hyun to know that no matter how painful the truth was, he would never face it alone. Felix wiped his tears, stood up slowly, and took one determined step toward the door, carrying nothing in his hands except the letter that had already changed him forever. Felix stopped just inches from the hospital room door. His hand hovered over the handle, but he could not bring himself to touch it. The words in Hyun's letter echoed relentlessly in his mind, each sentence carrying a weight that seemed impossible to escape. A soft voice broke the silence. You shouldn't go in. Felix turned slowly. An elderly nurse stood behind him, her expression kind but weary. She had likely witnessed countless reunions and countless goodbyes in these same corridors. He isn't asleep, she said gently. He's been staring at that door for nearly an hour. Felix frowned. If he's waiting. Why can't I see him? The nurse hesitated before answering. Because he's trying very hard to keep his promise. Felix lowered his gaze. A promise. Everything seemed to revolve around promises he had never known existed. He leaned against the wall, exhaustion finally catching up with him. The hospital lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the scent of disinfectant lingered in the cool air. Every passing second felt impossibly long. With trembling hands, he unfolded the letter once more. If you've made it this far, you're probably standing outside my room. Felix's eyes widened. Hyun had guessed exactly where he would be. A small, bittersweet laugh escaped him despite the tears gathering in his eyes. You really do know me too well, he whispered. He continued reading. Stubborn. You always have been. Even when everyone tells you to walk away, you keep searching for another door. Memories surfaced one after another. The late-night rehearsals. The quiet conversations after exhausting days. The moments when neither of them needed words because silence was enough. Hyun had always understood him in ways no one else could. The next lines were written more carefully, as though every word had taken tremendous courage. Truth isn't that I didn't want to see you. Felix stopped breathing. Truth is, I was afraid that if I saw your face, I wouldn't be strong enough to let you leave. A tear rolled silently down his cheek. For days, he had believed he was being rejected. Now he realized the opposite was true. Hyun had been protecting both of them. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Chan returned, this time carrying a small paper bag. He asked me to give you this if you came. Felix accepted it carefully. Inside was a familiar knitted bracelet, faded from years of wear. Felix recognized it instantly. They had bought matching bracelets from a tiny street market years ago, laughing because they looked too simple compared to the expensive accessories displayed nearby. Felix still wore his. Without thinking, he pulled back the sleeve of his hoodie. The bracelet remained wrapped around his wrist, old, frayed, never removed. Chan smiled sadly when he noticed. He knew you'd still have it. Felix closed the paper bag and held it tightly. Has he said anything else? Chan looked toward the closed hospital door before answering. Only one thing. Felix waited. He said that if today became the last day you spoke to each other, he wanted your final memory of him to be his smile, not this hospital room. The words shattered the fragile composure Felix had been trying to maintain. His shoulders trembled. His tears came without restraint. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The rain outside had finally stopped, and a beam of evening sunlight slipped through the hospital window, stretching across the polished floor until it reached the bouquet Felix had dropped earlier. The white lilies, though scattered, still looked beautiful beneath the warm light. Felix slowly walked over and knelt beside them. One by one, he gathered the flowers into his arms. Some petals were bruised, some stems had bent, yet none of them had lost their fragrance. He stared at them for a long moment before speaking softly. Still beautiful. Chan nodded. So is hope. Felix took a deep breath. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, the panic inside him eased. He understood now that forcing his way into Hyun's room would only break the promise Hyun had fought so hard to keep. Instead, he asked the nurse for a blank sheet of paper. Sitting quietly on a bench outside the room, with the bouquet resting beside him, Felix began writing a letter of his own. Every sentence came straight from his heart. Every word carried the hope that, even if they couldn't speak face to face today, Hyun would know one simple truth. No closed door could ever keep genuine friendship from reaching the other side.
Felix stared at the blank sheet for several minutes before writing the first word. His hand refused to move, not because he had nothing to say, because there was far too much. Finally, the pen touched the paper. Stopped again, smiling faintly through tear-filled eyes. It felt strange that after years of endless conversations, the most important words of his life suddenly seemed impossible to write. He took a slow breath and continued. I'm not writing this because they won't let me see you. I'm writing this because I want you to hear my voice without feeling like you have to be strong. A tear landed on the page. Felix didn't wipe it away. He let it remain there, hoping Hyun would know that every sentence had been written honestly. Outside the window, the evening sky turned shades of orange and violet. The rain clouds had begun to disappear, leaving the city wrapped in a quiet glow. For the first time that day, the hospital corridor no longer felt cold. It felt peaceful. A soft sound came from inside the room. Not a voice, not a cry, just the faint scrape of a chair moving across the floor. Felix instinctively lifted his head. The door remained closed, but someone was standing just behind it. His heartbeat quickened. Without thinking, he rose from the bench and slowly stepped closer. Only a thin wooden door separated them. He could almost imagine Hyun standing on the other side, listening to the same silence. Felix gently rested his palm against the door. A few seconds passed then. A soft tap answered from inside. Just once, Felix froze, his breathing caught in his throat. He slowly tapped back one gentle knock, silence. Then another single tap came from the other side. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. For nearly a minute they remained there, separated only by a closed door, sharing the quiet in a way only they understood. A nurse walking past noticed the scene and discreetly looked away, allowing the moment to remain undisturbed. Felix closed his eyes. So you're really there, he whispered, his voice barely audible. No answer came, only another light tap. A smile, fragile but genuine, appeared through his tears. I brought flowers, he said softly. I know you told me not to, but I couldn't help it. Silence that followed felt warm instead of painful. Felix imagined Hyun smiling on the other side, perhaps shaking his head, perhaps laughing quietly at how predictable Felix had always been. Chan watched from the end of the hallway. For the first time in days, the tension in his shoulders eased. He realized something important. Sometimes healing didn't begin with medicine. Sometimes it began with knowing that someone refused to leave. After several minutes, the doctor quietly approached Felix. "I think," he said gently, "there's something you should know." Felix turned immediately. The doctor's expression was no longer as guarded as before. "He read your messages every day." Felix blinked. "What?" He couldn't reply. "Why?" The doctor folded his hands, because every time he tried, his emotions became too overwhelming. His heart rate would rise and the medical team had to ask him to stop. Felix felt his chest tighten. "So, he wasn't ignoring me." The doctor slowly shook his head. "No." A wave of relief crashed through Felix so suddenly that his knees nearly gave way. Every unanswered message, every call that had gone to voicemail, every moment of silence. None of it had been rejection. Hyun had read every word. He had simply been trying to survive. Felix looked down at the letter in his hands before carefully folding it. "Can you give this to him?" he asked. The doctor accepted it with both hands. "I will." As the doctor disappeared into the room, Felix remained outside, watching the closed door with quiet hope. A few moments later, through the narrow window beside the door, he saw the doctor place the letter into Hyun's hands. Hyun held it gently against his chest before slowly closing his eyes. From where Felix stood, he couldn't see Hyun's face clearly. But he didn't need to. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, he knew without a doubt that the distance between them had never been measured by walls, locked doors, or silence. It had only ever been measured by love, trust, and the courage to protect each other, even when it hurt the most. The following morning arrived quietly. Golden sunlight filtered through the hospital windows, replacing the cold blue glow that had filled the corridors the night before. Nurses greeted one another with gentle smiles, medical carts rolled softly across the polished floor, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee drifted through the waiting area. Felix had never gone home. Curled up on a chair outside Hyun's room, he had fallen asleep with his jacket folded beneath his head. The bouquet of white lilies rested beside him, their petals slightly wilted but still carrying a delicate fragrance. A familiar voice woke him. "You stayed all night." Felix opened his eyes. Chan stood there holding 2 warm cups of coffee. "I wasn't ready to leave," Felix admitted. Chan handed him a cup before sitting beside him. For a while neither of them spoke. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt like 2 people sharing the same hope. After several minutes, the hospital room door opened. Felix immediately stood. His heart raced so violently that he could hear it in his ears. The doctor stepped outside with a gentle smile. "He read your letter." Felix's breath caught, and the doctor nodded. "He asked me to tell you something." Felix waited, hardly daring to blink. He said. The doctor paused, smiling softly. "Thank you for waiting." Those 3 words broke the last wall Felix had built around his emotions. He lowered his head, covering his face with one hand as quiet tears slipped between his fingers. They weren't tears of despair, they were tears of relief. Chan placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I told you," he whispered. "He never wanted to push you away." Felix laughed quietly through his tears. "I know." The doctor reached into his coat pocket. "There's one more thing." He handed Felix a small folded note. Unlike the long letter from yesterday, this one contained only a few handwritten lines. "Let the flowers go to waste. Put them somewhere they can see the sunlight. They deserve that much." Felix smiled immediately. It sounded exactly like Hyun, always thinking about small things, always finding beauty, even inside difficult moments. He looked down at the bouquet. Some petals had begun to curl around the edges, but they were still beautiful. He walked to the windowsill at the end of the hallway, where warm morning light poured through the glass. Carefully, he arranged the flowers inside a clear vase a nurse had kindly provided. The sunlight illuminated every white petal, making them appear almost radiant. "They look happier here," the nurse remarked. Felix nodded. "So does my heart." The nurse smiled before quietly returning to her duties. Later that afternoon, Felix sat alone in the hospital garden. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming roses and birds sang from the trees overhead. For the first time in days, the weight on his chest felt lighter. He took out his phone and opened the long list of messages he had sent to Hyun, messages that had never received a reply. Instead of feeling sadness, he smiled. Now he knew they had all been read, every encouraging word, every joke, every take care. None of them had disappeared into silence. Someone had treasured them. Just then his phone vibrated. It wasn't a text. It wasn't a call. It was a notification from the hospital's visitor desk. "Patient requests window visit." Felix frowned. "A window visit?" A nurse hurried toward him with a warm smile. "He's still not strong enough for visitors inside the room," she explained. "But if you'd like, you can wave to him from the rehabilitation courtyard." Felix's eyes widened. Without another word, he followed her. Moments later, he stepped into the quiet courtyard. The air smelled fresh after yesterday's rain. He looked up on the 2nd floor behind a large hospital window. Someone slowly approached. The figure was thinner than Felix remembered. His movements were careful. His shoulders looked tired, but there was no mistaking that familiar smile. Hyun, their eyes met across the distance. Neither of them spoke. Hyun gently placed one hand against the window. Felix mirrored the gesture from below, pressing his palm toward the glass even though they were separated by an entire floor. Then Hyun smiled a little wider. A real smile, not forced, not hiding pain, just genuine happiness. Felix smiled back through tears that he no longer tried to hide. In that quiet exchange, they both understood the same truth. Some reunions didn't begin with an embrace. Sometimes they began with simply seeing each other again under the same morning light, grateful that hope had survived the silence. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm. Every morning, Felix arrived before the sun had fully risen. He carried no flowers now, remembering Hyun's playful request to let the lilies enjoy the sunlight instead. Instead, he brought stories. He would sit on the same bench beneath the second-floor window and talk as if they were sharing breakfast together. He spoke about the changing weather, about the birds that had begun nesting in the hospital garden, about the little cafe across the street that still made coffee far too sweet. Sometimes he laughed at his own stories. Hopping the sound would drift upward. Behind the window, Hyun listened. Some days he smiled. Some days he simply rested his forehead against the glass. But he was always there. One afternoon, as golden sunlight stretched across the courtyard, the rehabilitation therapist approached Felix. "He's improving," she said with a gentle smile. Felix looked up immediately. "Really?" she nodded. "He walked a little farther today than he did yesterday." A wave of relief washed over him. It wasn't a dramatic recovery. It wasn't a miracle. It was something far more precious. It was progress. That evening, Chan joined Felix on the garden bench. "I haven't seen you smile like this in a while," Chan said. Felix glanced toward Hyun's window. "I finally understand something." "What is it?" "I kept thinking that being there meant standing beside him." Chan listened quietly. "But sometimes," Felix continued, "being there means waiting until someone is ready to open the door." Chan smiled. "I think he'd be happy to hear you say that." The next morning, Felix arrived carrying a small notebook. When Hyun appeared at the window, Felix opened it to the first page. Written in large, bold letters were the words, "Today's mission, smile at least once." Hyun read it from behind the glass. For a second, he tried to remain serious, then he failed completely. A quiet laugh escaped him. Even from the courtyard below, Felix could see his shoulders shaking with laughter. Mission accomplished. The nurse watching nearby chuckled softly. "I haven't seen him laugh like that since he was admitted." Felix's own smile grew wider. The notebook became their daily tradition. Each morning brought a new message. "Sky is beautiful today. Forget to rest. I'm saving the best cafe in town for when you're out. Your time, I'll still be here tomorrow." Every message earned a different expression from Hyun, sometimes a laugh, sometimes a nod, sometimes eyes that shimmered with emotion. One rainy afternoon, Hyun surprised everyone. As Felix finished another story from the garden, the hospital room door slowly opened. The therapist stood beside Hyun, supporting him carefully. His steps were slow, careful, unsteady, but they were his own. Felix stood without realizing it. Their eyes met across the corridor. This time, there was no window between them, no glass, no reflections, only a few meters of polished floor. Hyun smiled, looking both nervous and relieved. "I guess," he said softly, his voice still weak. "Waiting was worth it." Felix felt tears gather once more, but they were accompanied by a smile brighter than any he had worn in days. It was. Neither of them rushed forward, neither of them needed to. Some moments became meaningful precisely because they were allowed to unfold slowly. Step by step, Hyun walked closer with the therapist at his side. When he finally reached Felix, they stood face to face in silence. Felix searched his friend's eyes. The fear was still there, the exhaustion remained, but something new had appeared alongside them. Hope. Without saying a word, Hyun lifted his hand. Felix understood immediately. He reached out, and their hands met in a gentle, reassuring clasp. No dramatic embrace, no grand speech, just two friends holding on, grateful that time, patience, and unwavering trust had carried them through the darkest chapter they had ever faced. And in that quiet hospital corridor, where silence had once been filled with uncertainty, it now carried something far stronger. The promise that whatever came next, neither of them would have to face it alone. Weeks passed, and the hospital no longer felt like a place filled only with fear. The once unfamiliar corridors had become part of Felix's daily routine. Nurses greeted him by name, the receptionist smiled whenever he walked through the entrance, and even the security guard would jokingly ask, "Coffee for two again?" Felix always smiled, always. Although Hyun had grown stronger, recovery remained slow. Some days he could walk confidently through the rehabilitation hall. Other days, even a few careful steps left him exhausted. Whenever frustration appeared on Hyun's face, Felix never offered empty encouragement. Instead, he simply walked beside him. "If you need to stop," Felix would say, "then we stop. No pressure, no disappointment, just patience." One afternoon, the rehabilitation room was unusually quiet. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, warming the wooden floor where Hyun practiced balancing with the help of parallel bars. His breathing grew heavier. Sweat formed across his forehead, his hands tightened around the rails. "I can do one more," he muttered. The therapist shook her head gently. "Already done enough today." Hyun lowered his eyes. "I hate feeling weak." Felix, who had been sitting nearby, slowly stood and walked over. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up a chair and placed it beside Hyun. Then he sat down. Hyun looked at him, confused. "What are you doing?" "Waiting." "What? For you?" Hyun let out a small, tired laugh. You always do that, Felix smiled, because you've always been worth waiting for. Those simple words hung in the room. Hyun looked away, blinking rapidly. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, almost in a whisper, Hyun said, I was so afraid. Felix listened carefully. I thought, if you saw me like this, you'd remember this version of me forever. Felix shook his head. No, Hyun frowned. I don't remember you because of one difficult moment. Felix stepped closer. Remember the person who stayed beside me when I was struggling? The one who made everyone laugh after the longest rehearsals? The one who never forgot the little things? His voice softened. A hospital bed can't erase any of that. Hyun felt his eyes fill with tears. For weeks, he had carried the belief that illness had changed how people would see him. But hearing Felix speak so naturally, so sincerely, made that fear begin to fade. The therapist quietly left the room, giving them privacy. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows. Inside, the silence felt comforting. Hyun took a slow breath. Been reading your letters every night, Felix smiled. I know. Read some of them 3 or 4 times. Felix laughed softly. I was worried my handwriting would make recovery harder. That earned a genuine laugh from Hyun. It wasn't loud, it wasn't long, but it was real. Later that evening, as they sat together in the hospital garden, the sunset painted the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Hyun looked toward the horizon. I missed this. The sunset, Hyun nodded, and sitting quietly without thinking about tomorrow. Felix followed his gaze. For several minutes, they simply watched the sky change colors. No conversations about treatment, no discussions about fear, just 2 friends sharing a peaceful evening. As the first stars began to appear, Hyun spoke again. When I leave this hospital, Felix turned toward him. I don't want life to go back to the way it was. Felix tilted his head. What do you mean? Hyun smiled thoughtfully. I spent so much time rushing from one day to the next that I forgot to appreciate the people walking beside me. He looked at Felix. I don't want to make that mistake again. Felix nodded slowly. You won't. How can you be so sure? Because now, Felix replied with a warm smile, you know what almost losing those moments feels like. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers through the garden. For the first time since everything had begun, neither of them felt trapped by the past. They weren't looking backward anymore. They weren't worrying about tomorrow. They were simply grateful for the quiet gift of being together, one peaceful evening at a time, knowing that the strongest friendships are not measured by the absence of hardship, but by the choice to remain beside each other through every step of the journey.